What's going on, guys? Quick video today. And today we're going to be talking about who's going to be the UFC champion in each division, male only, by the end of 2026. So by December 31st, 2026, who's going to be the champion of each division? Let's dive right into it. So in the flyweight division, to begin off with, I think that, as good as Joshua Van is, the combination of a certain fighter being as good as he is, in conjunction with Pantoja's injury and unlikely resurgence, I think that the champion at the end of the year is going to be Japan's Tatsuro Taira. I think he is just a fantastic fighter pretty much from every angle. He did have some striking difficulties early on, as we saw in the Royval fight, but he really cleaned it up during the Moreno fight, both defensively and offensively. He's very smooth, but he also has that sort of Khabib-esque element where even though he isn't the absolute most dominant striker, his ability to convert into his process, which is ground game, is basically just unrivaled. He's peerless. He's one of the greatest grapplers I've ever seen, not only from a conversion standpoint, but also from a retention standpoint. And, all of the transitory elements as well. Like we saw 2 minutes, 2 rounds of full back control, I believe, versus Royval. We saw genuinely coherent control versus Moreno, who's no slouch on the ground. So, yeah, I think Tatsuro Taira is probably going to square off against Joshua Van. Who knows, maybe early second quarter of the year. He's going to win the belt by a submission, and he's going to hold on to it, no matter who he fights, whether it be Kape or a Royval rematch. It could possibly even be Pantoja once he's straight again. But yeah, I think Tatsuro Taira has what it takes to be the UFC champion, and he has more than enough to just get the belt. He's going to keep the belt, and I think he's going to have one of the most refined, illustrious legacies, not only just in flyweight, but in all of MMA when he's done. So yeah, Tatsuro Taira is going to be your champion at the end of the year. Moving on with the Bantamweight division, this is probably the most exciting division in all of MMA. I mean, come on, how could it not be? There's just so many good fighters. Merab Dvalishvili just went on one of the greatest runs we have ever seen in the history of the sport. You have fighters like Sugar Sean O'Malley, Corey Sandhagen, Petr Yan, who basically just established himself as one of the greatest mixed martial artists of all time with his latest performance. And you also have genuinely generational title contenders / non-champions, such as Umar Nurmagomedov, who genuinely, maybe arguably won the Merab fight, but to frame it in a way that doesn't take away from Merab, lost a razor-thin fight versus a prime Merab Dvalishvili. So Bantamweight is an extremely interesting and deep division. There's even fighters like Song Yadong. You have people that are on the rise, such as Talbot, who's really good. So this is a very interesting division. But, when everything's said and done, I think that Petr Yan is going to hold on to the belt, guys. I think that I just don't see Merab beating him. I think Yan has him completely figured out. And he sort of demoralized him, And I think Merab is just going to go into the second fight, if there is one, doubting his abilities. Even if he's refreshed, he's restored, he is getting up there in age. The battle mileage does take a toll on you, as we've seen with other fighters, perhaps Volk, perhaps Israel Adesanya. But yeah, I don't think Merab has what it takes to beat Petr, honestly, at this point of their careers. So I think that Petr is going to hold on to the belt. Sugar, Corey, these people don't have a chance, really, besides of a puncher's chance. And, I think Jan's going to hold on to the belt. There is one serious contender that I do think can threaten that possibility, and that's obviously going to be Umar Nurmagomedov. I mean, we all know how good he is. He demonstrated how dominant of a grappler he is in his early career, with multiple 30-26, even 30-25 fights. He's able to find the submission. He's able to ground and pound you even. But more than that, he has this ability to stand up, almost like an Islam Makhachev. That's sort of a rarity, specifically within the Nurmagomedov adjacent clan, where he has this ability to genuinely strike. Like, he outstruck Corey Sandhagen. He was piecing Marab up before that hand broke. He could fight front foot, back foot. I think he has some concerns in regards to chin. And sometimes maybe it feels as though, he gets overwhelmed in there. Maybe directionally, decision-making wise, he has places to improve. But he can definitely beat Jan. But all things said and done, I think Jan's going to beat Umar if they do face off. It's going to be an absolutely fantastic, I think, decade-defining fight, in relation to this era. But yeah, I think Jan is going to beat Nurmagomedov. Nurmagomedov is the only genuine title contender to take that belt off away from Jan. But I think his renewed vigor and his second wind of sorts to say, and coupled with, I think the cerebrality, how smart of a fighter he is, how he is able to adjust. I think when it comes to round 4 and round 5, I just don't think, I think Jan's going to win those rounds. So yeah, I'm going to take Piotr Jan to be the champion by the end of the year. And it's going to be a very good title fight between him and Nurmagomedov. But yeah, I think Jan will win a very close 48-47 fight to retain the Bantamweight belt by the end of the year. I feel like Featherweight is somewhat of a division where it's desiccate right now, and it used to be much better, especially in the Volk, the Holloway era, but it's still a pretty good division for what it's worth. There are a lot of up-and-coming younger talents that haven't really had a chance to fight for the belt yet, so it's really interesting. I will say this, as good as Volk is, I really do think it's going to catch up to him. I think I will pick him to beat Diego Lopez, but, he very well can get chinned. Lopez was already close enough last time, and since they've shared that much time in the octagon together, Lopez now just nearing his prime, while Volk is basically edging out of his prime, if he's not completely out of it already. Listen, I just think it's going to be, especially another fight after this, if Volk doesn't outright retire, he's just going to lose the next fight. You have Evloev. I think Volk can beat Liron, but I think Evloev's going to get the shot. And to segue to my point, yeah, I think Movsar Evloev is going to be the champion by the end of the 2026 year. I think he's a really good fighter. He's very reserved, but he's also tactical, and he can exert his will where he wants to, when he wants to. So my pick to be the champion is Evloev by the end of the year. He can grapple, he can strike, he's durable, he has cardio, he has a chin, and he doesn't take enough risk for those hard hitters like Lopez or even Silva, who, by the way, would be my serious contender for this division to beat Evloev and be champion. But Evloev doesn't take enough risk to really put him in harm's way against those power punches. And he just really has a style, a formula that I do think will bode well in the featherweight division for a while. I think he's a very, very talented fighter. And I think his combination of his ability to grapple, but also his ability to sort of adapt to any situation, I think that's sort of the edge. He doesn't make a lot of mistakes. That's the thing. So if he fights Volk, I think he's going to overwhelm him with athleticism. And if he fights someone like Lopez, he's just going to outpoint them very cerebrally while staying out of harm's way. So my pick to be the featherweight champion is definitely Movsar Evloev. John Silva is a fighter I want to talk about real quick. He would be my serious contender, just like Umar was for Bantamweight. Silva's an absolutely incredible fighter. He's very, very athletic. He can punch technically, but he also has knockout power. He's very creative and spontaneous. He adjusts well. Even if you demoralize him in a round, he can come back and put serious hands on you, as we saw in the Lopez fight. The reason why I think Silva will lose to Evloev is just the difference in IQ and how they approach fights. I think Silva is a tad too emotional, and I do think that Movsar can exploit this if Silva doesn't make mistakes himself. So yeah, really good prospects in terms of this future division's potentialities. But yeah, I'm gonna go with Evloev as the champion by the end of the year. My pick for the lightweight champion by the end of the year is going to be Arman Tsarukyan, you know? And really, I'm decently confident, as good as generational as Ilya is. I just think that Arman is a bad matchup. Let's get the scraps out of the way. You know, from the beginning, I don't think Gaethje is going to be doing anything. I don't think Paddy's going to be doing anything. I think they are bait for Ilya around April to June, as Ilya said. But if I think Ilya will remain champion unless he fights Arman, which I think he will. And the reason why, I'll tell you why. Dana's always been very interested in PRs and how people are perceived, right? And if you asked me maybe around October last year, I would say there's no way. Like he hates Arman. There's no way Arman's getting a shot. Arman's going to get cucked. But the reason I think he's going to warm up to Arman is because Arman's basically a star now. We see him on Neon, we see him on Aiden, we see him on a whole bunch of different interviews, MMA and non-MMA related. So I do think that Dana is going to cave and give Arman the shot simply because he's into that money, man. And when that happens, I think it's going to be an interesting fight. But I just truly think that Arman's grappling versus Ilya is just too overwhelming. He's going to take him down. He's going to put some hands on him. He's going to put some elbows on him. When they're standing up, Arman is very athletic and spry. He's going to keep that range. The one thing that I do want Arman to be careful about is conceding a submission. We haven't seen Ilya really submit too much people in the UFC yet. That was mostly pre-UFC stuff. But nonetheless, he does have a BJJ expertise. So it's very, very important to especially as we saw versus Charles, Arman sometimes has reckless entries here and there. And so he has to make sure he doesn't get caught in a ghillie or in a weird position, maybe a triangle choke, something of that nature. So barring that, I do think Arman will be smart enough to stay away on the feet and, take him down. So my pick for champion by the end of the year is going to be Arman Tsarukyan. He's basically Khabib light to me with some striking arsenal. I think he's going to have Ilya exactly where he wants him, and he'll be able to dominate the aspects, get in his head, and ultimately take advantage of Ilya's presumed weaknesses, which are his ground game so far. So yeah, Arman's going to be champ by the end of the year, and if suppose Arman doesn't get a title shot, this is perhaps the easiest division to predict. Ilya will finish with the belt once again. The winner of the Welterweight UFC Championship by the end of the year is going to be Islam Makhachev. Should I even elaborate? I don't think so, but for the sake of the video, I will. His only real competition is basically just, like, the only way I can see Islam losing, is literally just a surprise punch. Like, he's just so much more dominant, so much more experienced, so much more cerebral than everybody else. People are saying Ian Gary has a chance because he was able to not get taken down by Bilal. But we need to stop pretending like Bilal and Islam are similar calibers of grapplers. Like, let's just be serious right now, So, yeah, Islam's going to run through basically anybody they put in front of him. I know there's this ridiculous notion that Ilya might move up. If that happens, Islam's just going to dominate him. The size difference is too much. But yeah, there's really no comp for Islam, really. Once again, it's really just a power punch. And because of that, the person most likely to beat Islam is actually Miles Morales, in my opinion, just because he can sort of, like, I don't know how else to phrase this, so I'm going to just say he can sort of like retard strength without any strategy his way into a knockout, Sort of like how Francis used to fight, or maybe like how Prohaska fights sometimes. That's really the only way I see Islam losing the belt, because he's not getting out-techniqued. He's not losing the battle of wills. He's not losing in any athletic engagement. He's not going to get submitted. And I think he's very cerebral as a striker to not get outstruck with that strong of a weapon on him. Even against a fight versus JDM, Islam said he wanted to strike, but his camp propelled him to take him down. Why play to your weaknesses, So weaknesses, relative to him at least. But yeah, that's the reason why I have Islam being champion by the end of the year. He's just one of the best fighters of all time. Like, quite literally, we might be watching the possible GOAT. We very well might be. So Islam's going to be the champ by the end of the year. Middleweight, I'm going to go with Khamzat Chimaev. I think he's going to retain his belt. You know, the thing with Khamzat is that in terms of talent, when he's at his A game, there's just nobody that's going to compete with him. But there's a lot of outliers in terms of Khamzat. Like, you have to think about it. Like, he's always sick. You know, he comes to fights injured. There's probably going to be times where even if he is injured, he won't pull out because of the PR he receives. And so because of extenuating circumstances like that, I think a Khamzat loss is more plausible than an Islam loss, relative to the division, of course. But I just think Khamzat's going to come in this year and dominate, man. You know, he finally got the belt. I think he's going to come in after Ramadan, whoop whoever they put in front of him. And then this is actually an interesting fight on paper because it's two generational grappling talents. I'm talking about Anthony Hernandez, Fluffy. I think that's a fight that's probably going to happen September, October after Khamzat's first title defense next year. But again, you know, as good as Fluffy is, it's just levels. You know, we're talking about a GOAT level grappler versus an all-time great grappler. And I think Khamzat's just going to be too much for him. I think he's just stronger. I think to some extent, Fluffy can cardio mog you and put you in positions of extreme discomfort where, due to the sheer attrition, it advantages him. But that doesn't work against someone who is just so much stronger than you physically. That is just so much more overwhelming. We always talk about Fluffy dominating certain opponents with his style. But have we ever considered what Fluffy would look like in maybe round 3 after a Khamzat fight, after getting held down by him? So it's, again, once again, it's a fight that's pretty interesting in paper, but I just think Khamzat's going to do his thing, man. So I think he's going to be champ by the end of the year. One of the most dominant wrestlers, grapplers, archetypes we've ever seen, really. If he can just stay disciplined, keep his hands up, because again, he also has that sort of tendency, maybe like a Michael Chandler to some extent, maybe like a John Silva, where he gets too excited, overstimulated, and he tends to make poor choices at times, like we saw in the Burns fight. But if Khamzat comes in disciplined, both mentally and physically, no, he's dominating anybody. He's probably going to 50-44 Fluffy if he doesn't finish him. So yeah, Khamzat will be the middleweight champion by the end of the year. Now we got probably one of my least favorite divisions, honestly, but we got to talk about it. We're going to go to light heavyweight. Current champion's Alex, right? I think Alex is going to vacate and go to heavyweight. I'm pretty certain about this. So I'm not even going to keep like an outlier possibility. So I think that with the vacant belt, I think Jiri Prohaska is going to be champion, guys. I think, I just think Jiri's that sort of person where he comes back stronger after defeat, and especially after arduous scenarios. And we've literally seen him. That's sort of his calling card. Every time he's down, he just unlocks a new gear and somehow comes back and wins. That's how he came back versus Khalil Roundtree. I'm pretty sure he's done it before as well. Yeah, UFC 300 versus Rakic. So Jiri just has this sort of overwhelming ability to withstand everything that you have taken, and once you're relatively fatigued, overwhelm you. So I just think that when Alex is gone, it's going to be very, very hard to put Jiri away. I think to beat a fighter like Jiri, honestly, you have to finish him, Like, if Alex didn't have that power that he had, Jiri would have eventually caught him. That's my opinion, because he's just too unorthodox, too experimental, too progressive of a fighter to stay within a box, So if you want to beat Jiri, you have to finish him. And let's look at the archetypes against him. Let's look at the fighters. We have Ankalaev, who's a very good fighter, but who I don't think is going to finish Jiri, Who else do we have? We have Carlos Ulberg. Once again, I just don't think he has that finishing power on a consistent basis. He's more of an attrition archetype. And Rakic, Jiri beat. Who else is there? I think that's his main competition, honestly. I think Jan is over the hill. Yeah, I think Jiri's going to hold the belt by the end of the year, guys. I really do. I think Alex is gone, and he has the abilities to beat everybody who isn't outright going to finish him and knock him out cold. So Jerry's my pick for light heavyweight by the end of the year. He's just so unorthodox, so unpredictable, and this isn't necessarily really a criteria of his quality, but he's one of the most entertaining and dynamic fighters of all time. So I think he will hold the belt by the end of the year, and in fact, I'm rooting for him to hold the belt by the end of the year because when Jerry's around, the UFC is just much better. So Prohaska is going to be the champion by the end of the year. Heavyweight, probably the most unpredictable division for a plethora of different reasons, from pullouts to eye pokes to injuries to one punch knockout power across the board. So this is a very interesting division. It's a very volatile, inconsistent division by nature because once again, any fighter can be put away with any punch. And this is a principle that remains true for all of MMA, but more so for heavyweight just because of how powerful the strikes are. So once again, I do believe Alex Pereira is going to come up to heavyweight. He's probably going to fight John Jones. They're probably going to make that fight. If they don't, they're probably going to do an interim between Pereira and Gane. If Aspinall isn't ready, in which case I think Cyril Gane wins, actually, guys. Many people are going to say, what are you talking about, Lyrish? Pereira has all that overwhelming power. He's just going to walk forward, snipe him. There's a real possibility of that, and I don't deny it at all. In fact, that's probably the second most likely thing to happen, but I just think Gane has a certain, outboxing. He has a certain, I don't know how to word it, but he's very good at managing distance and fighting fighters who come at him with rapid speed or blitzes. We saw shades of it before, against various versions, against Tai Tuivasa, who's a horrible fighter, but also against Francis, who despite the knee injuries, Francis didn't really land a single clean punch versus Gane. Because if it did, he would have been lights out. So I think Gane, there's this sort of comedic element to him where people ridicule him and where his PR changed entirely because of the Jones fight. But I genuinely just think the moment was too big for him there, right? Because he was fighting Jones, a fighter who respected so much and all of that jazz. But a genuinely focused, locked-in Cyril Gane, guys, this is a fighter who dominates people, dominated Derek Lewis, had a pretty close to a striking masterclass versus Francis. If you go and watch that fight back, dodged basically the majority of Francis's big strikes, basically all of them, put legit hands on him, and basically won all the exchanges where they weren't standing. There's that fight. There's the Spivak fight, Tai Tuivasa once again. We've seen fights like the first Volkov fight, other fights, once again, the bits and pieces of the Aspinall fight as well, where this guy is genuinely, Aspinall's one of the fastest fighters there is, relative to heavyweight specifically, but really, he's fast in general. And Cyril was able to dodge basically all of the blitzes. He was able to counter, move back in the nick of time, have a kicking arsenal, and he put hands on him. He made him bleed. So as good as Pereira is, guys, I don't think his blitzing strategy would work as well against as a fighter like Gane as it would like Ankalaev the second time around, because Gane is a legit professional counter striker, and he can hit you from an array of different angles: sneaky elbows, knees, clinch strikes, counter lefts, counter rights, kicks. So I think that Gane is going to be able to dodge the ultimate equalizer for most of the fight. And, he's going to win a decision if he fights Pereira. And the other people, I don't think they're going to be a problem at all. Even if Aspinall comes back, I think Gane's going to win that fight because I think Gane has him figured out. So, yeah, I think Cyril Gane's going to end up champion by the end of the year. And, yeah, if Pereira he rushes that single shot that he's been looking for, he might get put out, man, because Gane is an expert counter striker, and Pereira just might not be ready for that heavyweight power. So, yeah, that's my prediction for the heavyweight division's champion by the end of the year. Last year probably marked one of the greatest championship lineups ever. We had Pantoja, Merab actually, and then we had Volk, Ilya, Islam, Hamza, Alex, and Aspinall. Every single fighter here. It's pretty generational relative to division, and many of them are GOAT candidates. such as Ilya, Islam, Jan. So it's going to be hard to top that championship lineup, honestly. But I think the guys that I mentioned have what it takes to usurp last year's champions as well as the current champions this year, and to even rival, what that lineup looked like. So my final catalog of soon to be champs is going to end with Tyra, Yan, Evloev, Sarukian, Makachev, Chimaev, Chiri, and Gan. These are going to be your champions by the end of 2026. MMA is a very, very tough sport to predict. I gave multiple names for certain divisions because of that nuance, but I genuinely believe that every fighter I mentioned has a serious chance at the belt, at least. And I do believe that over half of them, at least, will be champ by the end of the year. So, yeah, thank you guys for watching. I hope this video was dope. One of my favorite sports, man. This is my second favorite sport to cover, so I can make UFC videos for days. Let me know if y'all want to see, any other videos within this sport. And yeah, I'll see y'all next time.